Hello and welcome back to Silver Age Silver Screen, the podcast where we watch, rate, and review sci-fi, cult, superhero, and other stereotypically geeky films. I'm your co-host, Casey Charms.
And I'm your other co-host, Riley Thorpe.
And the famous Roman poet Juvenal once said, "Who watches the Watchmen?" And the answer to that question is us. We watched Watchmen, the Zack Snyder adaptation. It was okay. Well, it was better than okay. Actually, something I don't know. Have you ever read Watchmen the book?
No, I have not, but I've done a lot of research into it, and from what I understand is that Watchmen is considered by many to be one of the greatest comic book graphic novels ever made.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Written by Alan Moore. It won a Pulitzer, right?
I know it won a lot of awards.
Yeah.
It's acclaimed. It's one of the most influential comics of its era.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff that we nowadays just kind of expect to see from superheroes and comic books and stuff like that, like in the MCU or in The Boys, the Amazon Prime series, it's like...
Very different tone.
Yeah,
very I get what you're saying.
But no, what I'm trying to say is the typical superhero archetypes, characters, and stories that we see are so accustomed to nowadays, that was really started by both Stan Lee in the 60s and Alan Moore's work on Watchmen. What Alan Moore did was he made an entire story around this idea of what if superheroes aren't good people? Like, if there was a group of people like the Justice League or the Avengers, and they were the superheroes that protected the world, what would they be like during the Nixon era? What would they be like during the Cold War? What if they had the power that they did? They'd probably be pieces of shit.
Yeah, like the whole idea behind Watchmen, not just that they would be pieces of shit, although a few of them are pieces of shit in the series, is that what type of person would do this? Like, how mentally messed up would you have to be to dress up like a bat and jump off rooftops? The whole idea behind Watchmen is analyzing, like deconstructing what type of person will become a superhero.
Yeah.
And the answer is, loser, terrible person,
Nazi.
deranged, basically, murderer, arrogant dude who's going to destroy the world, barely human, and mommy issues.
Yeah.
Oh, also sociopath. Forgot sociopath.
Right, of course. And Alan Moore originally, this is just a fun fact, originally was not intending this to be like its own thing. He was originally planning on having it be a part of the greater DC universe, what with characters like, pretty sure Peacemaker, The Question, what was it, Captain Atom was another one?
Captain Atom. So,
Yeah.
like, DC over the years, they've just sort of absorbed a couple other comic book companies that went under and just had their characters now be DC characters. And when they got, I forget what comic company it was, but it was the one that made Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, Peacemaker, The Question. They went to Alan Moore and were like, hey, make a comic with these characters. And Alan Moore did what Alan Moore does when he's asked to make stuff. And he's like, okay, so it's a murder mystery and they're all just bad people and it's very dark. And DC was like, okay, no, love the story. We will never be able to use these characters again if you publish this. So just make them XPs. Captain Atom becomes Dr. Manhattan. Blue Beetle becomes Night Owl, etc.
Yeah, and then despite the fact that they're like, oh, we'll never use those characters now, over the last few years, they've used those characters quite frequently.
Yeah.
The fucking DC Rebirth was all because of Dr. Manhattan, right?
Yeah, which is interesting. Like, the end of this movie is, I tire of you people and your petty problems, so I'm going to go off and try and find new life. And by that, I mean, I'm going to go to a different universe and rewrite it to make everyone edgier. And also, like, 10 years younger, which will create so many continuity problems. Oh, Batman's been a character for 10 years and has a 10-year-old son? Let's make it so Batman's been Batman for 5 years and has a 10-year-old son. Wait, I sense a problem.
Well, Watchmen did was really took a completely different approach to the superhero genre, and an approach that we nowadays take for granted. We're like, the idea of these superheroes, what's behind the mask? Maybe what's behind the mask isn't all that great of a person. You know, that idea is something that we typically, like, what if these people had internal problems? Like, what if fucking Homelander, the Superman archetype, what if he was a literal, emotionally unstable psychopath who's about to break mentally? What if Iron Man, the guy that saved the half of the universe, what if he is just kind of this irrational douchebag who kind of makes all of his own problems but then has to fix them? So this idea of being human beings behind it, and maybe not always being the greatest of human beings, these superheroes being characters that have interesting story arcs and interesting development, we take that for granted. But in large part, the direction that Alan Moore took in particular was revolutionary for comics in that point.
And I do like how this had major effects on the comics industry, and not always in the great way. It led to a lot of really dark, introspective stories, but also led to the dark age of comic books, something that Alan Moore is very apologetic about. Like, okay, let's do a deconstruction. Like, let's introduce this character, Rorschach, who is not a good hero, who kills people because he has issues. And the point is that he's a very flawed character that shouldn't be idolized. And then a bunch of people saw that and are like, whoa, that's badass. All the heroes should be like that. And they should have pouches and not feet.
Rob Liefeld. Anyway, obviously, what with the massive success that was the graphic novel, we were inevitably going to receive a live-action film adaptation, which Alan Moore has only exclusively ever denounced the film adaptations of his work. But that's neither here nor there.
I'm kind of torn on Alan Moore. On one hand, yeah, I can understand him not liking the adaptations, just getting burned out on them. Like, I'm pretty sure it started with the terrible Sean Connery League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie. Yeah. And just after that, he doesn't want to watch any adaptations, even though the V for Vendetta adaptation is actually really good.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I've always kind of felt that was kind of hypocritical of more like, I don't want people adapting my work and changing it. Bruh. That is your career. Just taking characters like Miracle Man or The Question or Swamp Thing and radically changing them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I will say, like, I respect the idea that he is like, no, I have my art, I have what I've created, and that is all it is to me, and that's all it should be. But at the same time, I often feel like he just does that on principle, and that just seems really douchey. Like, I understand the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie. That's trash. Don't get me wrong, we all agree on that. But with him, I understand him hating that. But then, like, just for the rest of his films, the rest of the films based on his work going forward, just being like, I'm not even gonna watch. Like, he hasn't even seen V for Vendetta. He said he read the first, like, 5 pages of the treatment for the script of V for... Not even the script. I'm pretty sure he read the first few pages of the treatment for the script for V for Vendetta and said it was rubbish. I'm just saying, I understand and respect the idea that he holds his work to such a high standard, but at the same time, it just seems like he's doing it on principle, and that's douchey to me.
Yeah. And speaking of adaptations and people liking Watchmen, there is one director who really loves Watchmen. So much that he tried to make his Superman and Batman movies Watchmen, and we've said our feelings on that.
Yeah.
And also, I don't think he really understands Watchmen, which I'll get into in this review. But he definitely likes it because of all the violence and sex and stuff. And that man's name is Zack Snyder. We've talked about him a lot. He keeps coming up on this podcast for some reason. He made the 2009 adaptation to Watchmen, which is an adaptation of Watchmen. It's the most comics accurate adaptation I've ever seen a film be.
Even more than Sin City?
Maybe. I haven't read Sin City. This is basically just the book. Its dialogue is often lifted directly from the writings of Alan Moore. Its shot composition is very similar to the panels by Dave Gibbons, and it doesn't really change much. It changes like 3 things, and I hate every single change, and I'll rant about them. But this movie is basically just the graphic novel, which has its strengths and weaknesses. On one hand, it's the best written Zack Snyder movie I've ever seen because he had nothing to do with the writing of it. And it does get a lot of the depth and intelligence from the book. But on the other hand, there are parts of this movie that feel kind of stilted and sterile, where it's just, hey, let's recreate this panel because that's how it was in the book, without really regard for pacing or how that relates to the things that you had to cut out for time. And it's a very interesting adaptation. I go back and forth on how much I liked it.
I mean, I've mentioned this before in the previous episodes. While I myself am not the biggest fan of Zack Snyder's films, I respect him as an artist and as a person. And with regards to what Casey just said, when you're adapting something, you have to make it work for the medium that you are adapting it into. Some of the stuff does feel stilted every once in a while, and that's in the name of making it more comic accurate. At the same time, being comic accurate is great, but if it's in some ways at the expense of the film, and we talked about this also in the Harry Potter films, like if you're keeping something in the film just because it was in the book and it weighs down the film, it weighs down the film regardless. No amount of, oh, but the book did that, doesn't matter. This isn't the book, this is the film. You know, he, as an artist, is very much so into, like, darker, edgier, more violent stuff. Like, look at all of his movies. I mean, fucking Dawn of the Dead, 300, Watchmen. He has a 4-hour rated R Justice League movie, which, listen to our review on that. But it's like, he likes darker, more edgier stories. And I believe he, in the past, has mentioned how he was always a fan of comic books, but he was more into like the darker, grittier stuff. But typical superhero fiction was not like that for a while until Watchmen came out, and it had all this blood and violence and sex in it. And he was like, yeah, that's what I really was drawn to, which good for you, dude. I'm glad that he recognizes what he likes and what he wants to create and draws inspiration for what he wants to create. But, you know, sex and violence is also in Cannibal Holocaust. You ever heard of that movie?
No, but it sounds terrible.
It's just an old school exploitation grindhouse movie that has a lot of sex and violence in it. Some interesting commentary as well. But the point is, what makes Watchmen great is not the fact that there is sex and violence in it. It is the incredibly written story, the themes it juggles with, the philosophy, and the deconstruction it has on our society and on the time period that it came from, as well as the characters that we, as fans of superhero fiction, love so much. I mean, like you said, Casey, what if the guy that won wars for us, that protects and serves everything, what if he's a rapist Nazi? What if the other guy standing right next to him, what if he is this out-of-shape, awkward, impotent loser? You know? What if his former partner is just a straight-up murderer? You know, it's like, Watchmen is great, not because of the explicit material within it, though I'm a fan of that as well, and I think that in many ways that tells the story well. It's done well in the story, is my point. But it's great not because of that, it's great because of everything else, in addition to that.
So let's get into it. This film opens up in 1985. It was not a period piece when the book was written, but because of the passage of time, it is now a period piece. Mm-hmm. It's 1985. Richard Nixon is president in his, was it fourth or fifth term? I don't know. That is way too many Nixon terms.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
it's too many terms for anyone, let alone Tricky Dicky. But
yeah. God, I've been rewatching Futurama recently, and I can't take Richard Nixon seriously, even though he was genuinely someone who should be regarded seriously. He did some fucked up things. Yeah. I don't know. It's 1985. Richard Nixon is still president. Oh boy. The Cold War is heating up. The Soviets are about to invade Afghanistan, and this news broadcast is being watched by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, this old retired army dude. And suddenly, a man breaks into his apartment, and they have a fist fight, which is admittedly pretty good. It's very similar to 300 in the stylized slow motion. It feels like just
The camera work
Yeah.
as well, yeah.
It feels like comic panels.
Yeah.
And interestingly, this is like not in the book. Like the book opens with the close-up on the badge, then like zooming out, and then Rorschach's monologue. Like, you don't see Eddie get murdered in the book. And honestly, I don't know if it was really necessary to add that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it sets up this interesting mystery of like, who the fuck is are these people? Who the fuck is this guy getting murdered? Then you learn about who he is. Then you learn how shit of a human being he is.
Oh boy.
And then it's like, okay, there might be a larger conspiracy here.
Yeah.
I guess it sets it up, but I don't know. I liked how it opened. It sets it up fairly well.
What I do like about this film's opening is its opening credits. As the song The Times They Are Changing is playing, as it's just showing the whole backstory. That's really effective. The film doesn't have time to get into the decades of backstory from the comics, so it just shows like these snapshots of it, of the rise and falls of superheroes. Them beginning in the 30s and fighting crime, and then all dying because being a superhero is hard. One of them is murdered for being gay. One of them goes to an asylum. Then the second generation of heroes shows up, and then they disband. Also, Dr. Manhattan, and we'll get to him.
Yes.
Also, it shows Jeffrey Dean Morgan's character. His name is Edward Blake, aka the comedian. It shows him killing Kennedy, which is only hinted at in the book, but it's confirmed in the movie that this man murdered Kennedy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great scene. It's the best scene in the movie. It's such an effective way of getting across this information without bogging down the narrative.
Oh, yeah. Now, this title sequence is the greatest title sequence I've seen in a movie ever. Calling it right now. It's my favorite, at least. For nothing else. It might not be the best. My opinion might change later if I see a better one. But as of right now, goddamn, was that an amazing opening credits. And it got me into Bob Dylan. I'm a huge fan of Bob Dylan now. Completely because of this title sequence. It was really well done. It's just so good. Also, I don't know if you noticed this, but Gerard Butler is credited in the opening credits.
Who does he play?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure whatever role he had, he was cut. Maybe he was like Hooded Justice or something, one of the original Minutemen. But
Hold on, I'm looking this up.
that was something that always stood out to me because I saw this movie a long time ago for the first time. And I was like, oh, Gerard Butler's in this. But then I watched it, I'm like, it's been like 3 hours. He's not
Okay, I get it. So basically, this film has two cuts. We watched just the standard one. There's a director's cut that features him. Basically, one of the subplots in the book is this constant cutaway to a Golden Age pirate comic that parallels Adrian's arc in the book. And in that scene, which was animated and was going to be in the movie but was cut for time, later restored in the director's cut, Gerard Butler is the narrator, according to a very quick Google.
Yeah. Point is, he's still in the original version, in the theatrically released version, he's still credited. I mean, it sucks that he got cut. Obviously, I hate it when I hear actors getting completely cut from a movie, but I don't know, I just think it's so weird that he's still credited. But anyway, Jeffrey Dean Morgan. I mean, I will say, I think this movie is very, very well casted.
Yeah, the casting is great. I think with one exception, all of the main cast are utterly perfect in their roles. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, he's a great actor. He does a great job as just this despicable middle-aged retired superhero.
Yeah. It is funny because Jeffrey Dean Morgan is like always referred to by many people who he's worked with as like one of the nicest people you will ever meet. Like he's just so down to earth and sweet to everybody and just a genuine good person. But he just always plays the worst, like most despicable characters. Like he'll play Negan in The Walking Dead and the comedian in Watchmen and
the shitty dad in Supernatural.
Yeah, he'll play John in
Supernatural. He's not evil, but he is an asshole.
Yeah, like he's such a great actor and he's so great at playing the most heartless, evil characters to varying degrees. But in real life, everyone says he's like the sweetest guy you'll ever meet.
Yeah. Speaking of really good castings, after Eddie's murder and the times are a-changing, we get how the book starts with panning out from Eddie's logo as his corpse is in the street. And then Rorschach, one of our main characters, this edgelord vigilante, monologuing about how evil the city is. It's a festering sewers of blood and death that will rise up with the prostitutes and the gay people, and they'll beg for mercy, and I'll say no.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, Rorschach's monologues are fucking stupid. I don't think he's a cool character, but Jackie Earle Haley is so good in the role. He has such a perfect, deep, raspy voice for this character.
Yeah. Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Jackie Earle Haley, I think, are so fucking underrated actors. And Jackie Earle Haley in particular, or now that we're talking about, he is fucking phenomenal in this movie. And I'm going to go on a limb here. We reviewed Nightmare on Elm Street movies a few weeks, months back, whatever. He played Freddy Krueger in the 2010 reboot. And you know what? I'm going to say it right now. He was a fucking great casting as Freddy Krueger. That said, the movie is fucking horrible.
Was he better than, what's his name, the traditional Freddy?
No, he was not better than Robert Englund. But for taking what had become a cheesy, campy 80s horror franchise that just was dead, essentially, rebooting it, remaking it as this dark, gritty, fucked up slasher movie, he was a great choice. It's too bad the movie was garbage and they CGI'd his face, so he just looks like he has a fucking CGI pancake on his face. Oh, and in that movie, I think I meant, it just, instead of being a child killer, he's a child molester.
You've mentioned.
So the point is, Jackie Earle Haley is incredible in this movie, as he is in most everything he does. And him and Jeffrey Dean Morgan are incredible in this movie, and they're both underrated.
So, as we saw kind of in the opening, and as later properly explained, years ago, the second generation of superheroes, which Rorschach and the comedian were both part of, they almost formed a team. But they broke up immediately due to personality differences. And now that one of the superheroes is dead, Rorschach thinks, ooh, this might be a serial killer coming after other superheroes. So he goes around to all of his old friends and he tells them, hey, the comedian's dead, be alert. First, he goes to Dan Dryberg, aka Night Owl, this nerdy dude retired from superheroes who just spends his night talking to another retired old superhero. Dan later relays the information onto Adrian, this billionaire superhero once called Ozymandias, who is a brilliant scientist and not at all suspicious.
No, not at all.
And finally, Rorschach tells this to our remaining main characters. Dr. Manhattan, the only one with superpowers, who is basically God, and also his ordinary girlfriend, Lori.
We eventually go on to learn that the superheroes of the Watchmen, essentially.
Yeah, they aren't called the Watchmen in the book. It's just, all the chapters in the book are famous quotes that tie into the themes, and Watchmen ties into themes. Who watches the Watchmen? Who polices the police? That's what it's about. Yeah. But the team is actually called Watchmen in this movie, which it's fine.
Yeah, and then we eventually find out that the team altogether was basically political pawns to the Nixon administration. They won Vietnam in a week.
Yeah, which is such a good scene of Dr. Manhattan just walking through the plains of Vietnam, killing people with his mind powers as Ride of the Valkyries plays, and the comedian's with him fucking lighting a cigar with his flamethrower. It's brutal. And they made Vietnam a state after conquering it in this continuity, which is the most unrealistic thing in this series.
Yeah. So you learn more about all these characters. You subsequently learn, and I'm assuming it's in the same order of the book.
Basically.
Yeah. It did feel a little info dumpy at times. Like, you learn a lot about all these characters, like, predominantly about Dr. Manhattan and the comedian, where they're coming from, what their backgrounds are. And you learn Dr. Manhattan was a regular scientist who was in an accident that turned him into essentially a living nuclear weapon. And how the world reacted to that, this idea that a major superpower, the US government, has a living nuclear weapon just at their disposal during the Cold War.
Yeah.
And
there's this phenomenal quote in this movie. When Dr. Manhattan first appears, a reporter misquotes one of the scientists and says, he said, Superman is real and he's an American. And later we find out the actual quote was, God is real and he is an American. And if that fills you with this deep religious dread, congratulations, you're still sane.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we also learn a lot more about the comedian. And we find out eventually, we end up finding out that he tried to rape the first Silk Spectre, and no doubt raped a lot of women before. He gunned down a woman who was pregnant with his child. He shot children protesting in the streets, protesting the Nixon. And he just was overall not a good guy at all.
I think the way we should do this review at this point is to just sort of go through the cast and describe them, because the first half of this movie is basically just setting up who these people are. The comedian, we get just back to back a lot of scenes about his backstory while everyone's at the funeral.
And those scenes, to me, felt a little info dumpy.
Yeah.
To me.
Honestly, the pacing in this movie is kind of weird because the comic is split into 12 issues and each issue is its own thing.
Yeah.
And the film is just going through issue by issue, and you can kind of tell where the cuts are. Like, there's an issue that is just Dr. Manhattan narrating his backstory, and then there's about a 12th of this movie. It's just a long scene of him narrating his backstory. The comedian was just this nihilistic, sociopathic asshole. This brutal, evil man who his own teammates, the other superheroes, thought was fucking horrible.
Yeah.
He ended up being one of the only ones still active after superheroes got outlawed because he just became a fucking assassin.
Yeah.
He's just evil. He tried to rape Lori, Silk Spectre. He tried to rape her mom, which comes back in an interesting way.
We also learn more about the Lori, the original Silk Spectre, or the second Silk Spectre. She's basically just a superhero because her mom wanted to continue her legacy as the original Silk Spectre.
And I will say, I think, and she's not terrible, but is definitely the weakest part of the main cast, would be Malin Ackerman as Lori. She's just,
Yeah, I feel like that's mostly because just the way she was written and portrayed in this movie. I mean, Malin Ackerman does a fine job. Just look at the introductions to all these other characters. You get Rorschach, who's like giving the darkest, edgiest, kind of lame monologues you can ever give, talking about like the whores and the politicians, and all these people will drown in the blood that runs in the street, and I will not help them. And then Night Owl is just this kind of just borderline pathetic, insecure, nerdy guy. And then Dr. Manhattan is, a fucking god. And it's just the way all these characters are introduced and presented. And Silk Spectre just kind of walks on screen as the girlfriend.
And that is honestly what her role in Watchmen is. And it's not great, is to be the girlfriend to both Dr. Manhattan and Night Owl during different parts of the story. She does have some interesting art stuff with her repressed memories and her very fucked up childhood, but I don't know if the movie touched on that as much as they could have, or as much as the book did.
No, this is very much a product of, let's just put the women to the side. And it's not that great. In my opinion, Malin Ackerman does a fine job for what she's given, but she's not given a whole lot. And that's unfortunate.
Also, as part of the team, we've talked about him briefly, is Night Owl, this loser. He's a nerd.
Yeah.
He's pretending he doesn't, but he really misses being a superhero and an action hero. And now that he can't be that anymore, he's just
impotent.
Literally. Most of his arc in this movie is him hanging out with Lori and them slowly becoming a couple. And skipping ahead a bit, there's a scene where they try and have sex and no, it doesn't. And then he has a dream of them naked in the desert, and they rip off their skin and they're in their costumes, and then they have sex, and then a nuke happens.
Yep.
I mean, his arc is he eventually starts being a superhero again because fuck it, the world's ending, I want to do what I want, and regains his masculinity. Ugh. Still a fucking nerd, though.
Yeah.
Rorschach is not well.
Yeah, you could say that.
He's a violent murderer. He's an anti-hero. He kills people. They cut out a lot of the sort of comedy and like kind of charming weirdo friend stuff with Rorschach of him just like constantly breaking into Dan's apartment and eating beans. But he is a very interesting character. I like Rorschach as a character. I just like him in a specific way that has an asterisk. And they don't really go too much in this movie. They cut up most of Rorschach's backstory, his daddy issues, and his mom being a prostitute. But they do eventually show
his origin.
Yeah, the moment he became Rorschach. I mean, he was already a vigilante, he was already a superhero, but one day he came across the pedophile.
Who kidnapped, tortured, and murdered a 6-year-old girl and fed the remains to his dogs. And so he fucking smashed a meat cleaver into the guy's head.
Yeah, and that's a change I don't like. I like it better in the book, and I'm gonna keep talking about the book. Because in the movie, he just sees this horrible thing that kills his faith in humanity, and he freaks out, and he just smashes the guy's head in angrily. But in the book, he doesn't react with anger. He just calmly chains the man up and then sets the apartment on fire and gives the man a saw and says, "You might live if you cut your arm off." Just completely deadpan, no emotion left. Like, I feel like that's better at showing he's broken than him beating a man to death, because anger means you're still human.
Yeah, in the novel, what Rorschach learned from that, I mean, he lost all humanity after that. He says in both the novel and the book, in the film, that whatever remained of Walter Kovacs died that night. And all that was left was Rorschach. You know, that's pretty badass. But I think for what they were going for in this film, it is a change. And in many ways, personally, I think how Rorschach is presented in the novel, that I, in fairness, have not read, but the idea of both of them, I think for what both the novel and the film were going for, I think the change to the film, I think both work to represent the character how each medium will be. Because, as you said, in the novel, what Rorschach learned from that event is all that matters is the choices we make. You chose to do that to that little girl, and so here's the saw. If you wanna live, you gotta make that choice, man. And it's left ambiguous of whether or not the guy survived at all. What he learned in the novel is all that matters is the choices we make. And as a superhero, I am going to do what I believe is the right thing. Regardless, under no circumstances do I do anything that is not the right thing in his mind. However, in the film, he was instilled in this black and white mentality. And yes, I agree, making him emotionless out of anger instead of just out of the sick realization of what the world is really like. Making it out of anger and killing the guy instilled this idea of this black and white moral mentality that makes sense. His final decision at the end of the film, it made it work in the film. Yeah. It made his decision make sense.
Let's ignore Ozymandias for a second, because the interesting things about him come at the end of the movie. And let's talk about our last main character, the big one, Dr. Goddamn Manhattan. John Osterman is his real name, but no, it's Dr. Manhattan. This bald, blue dude who is fucking naked throughout the film, just his wang, flopping around.
Dr. Manhattan is the Superman. He is the only one with powers, and we'll get into that later, because that is a pretty important thing that the film kind of misrepresents. But Dr. Manhattan is a focal point of political tension and political fallout in this in this story, in this world. And on top of that, as the years go by, he slowly starts to lose touch with humanity, because his loved ones are getting older, they are moving on, and horrible things are happening, it just slowly instills in him this idea that it just doesn't really matter to him, because to him, time is relative.
Yeah. The interesting thing about Dr. Manhattan, besides the godlike power, is that he sees time differently. Like, he can see the future. He's experiencing every moment simultaneously, and that's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one of this film's best scenes is when he goes to Mars. He talks about his backstory in present tense, just jumping around to all these things happening simultaneously, because that's how he sees them. Yeah. And it's really, really interesting. And his arc in this movie, before the ending, where he changes, is Glory dumps him because he focuses too much on work and doesn't really care about him. He finds out, oops, gave all his loved ones cancer and they're dead now, so he just goes to Mars and builds a cool house and lives on Mars.
Yeah, and his whole arc, by the end, he realizes, he goes, you know what? My place is not with humanity. I think one of the final lines is, maybe I'll create new life.
Yeah.
In a new universe.
Yeah,
and,
a new continuity that no one liked.
Yeah, and...
well, there were some good books, but overall the relaunch wasn't great.
Yeah, no. He is essentially, what would a guy, given godlike powers, what would that do to him over time? You know? And he would lose touch with humanity. And he would be, for the rest of us, he would be a focal point of so much fear and tension, because you have literally a guy who can win an entire war in a week. Not even, like, the Vietnam War specifically, that war was fucking hell for the people that fought in it. But
yeah, like, he didn't just end the Vietnam War. We specifically see Vietnamese soldiers bowing down and worshiping him because he's basically a god. Yeah. Like, there's this phenomenal line at the end when he defeats Adrian where he says, "To me, the world's smartest man is no different than the world's smartest termite." He's
so far beyond humanity, and he is surrounded by humans. And that is a point in this film that I feel that the film misrepresents, because the whole point is that they are regular people. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Manhattan is the only one with powers. That said, there's multiple scenes in this movie where Night Owl and Silk Spectre are literally throwing people down alleyways and, like, kicking them, and they're going flipping back and forth.
Yeah, they don't have powers in the way that every single non-powered superhero doesn't. In the way that, oh yeah, Batman can just, like, pick up a dude and throw him 30 feet and, like, fight off a million dudes at once. They basically have powers.
Yeah, but the point of the Watchmen is that they are just regular people with special gifts that they see themselves as being in the position to do the right thing. I mean, Night Owl, he's just essentially a realistic Batman, or that's what he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be a realistic Batman. Same with fucking the comedian. He's just a dude with a gun.
Yeah. And I do like how, and this is because there were 3 different Batman knockoffs in the comic company that, again, I forget its name, but the characters were turned into the Watchmen. But there were 3 different Batman knockoffs, which ends up with this film having 3 different Batmen. Half of the main cast is Batman. And there's a scene where Batman and Batman get their asses kicked by Batman.
Yeah. But the point is, I think one of the things that I personally think was a bit of a misstep with this film is the fact that in order to make some really cool action, it kind of misrepresented the idea of these are humans, just regular humans. And that, I think, was a misstep.
Yeah. So overall, the overarching plot of Watchmen is about this mysterious conspiracy taking out all of the superheroes, and Rorschach investigating it. I mean, Dan and Rory are off dating, but Rorschach, he's the one who's investigating things. The hero killer doesn't stop with the comedian. There's an attempt to murder Ozymandias that Ozymandias survives by just bashing the guy with the pole, and then the guy kills himself. Dr. Manhattan is taken out by having it revealed to him that he's giving people cancer, and he just goes to Mars, so he's out of the picture. Rorschach, during his investigation, is framed for murder. Well, Is it framing a guy for murder when he has definitely committed multiple murders over the years? Framing for a murder that he didn't commit, although he definitely has committed murders. The important thing is Rorschach gets caught by the police and he goes to jail. And we get the famous throw burning oil in a guy's face. I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me. And also Dan and Lori become superheroes again because the world's gonna end. Because Dr. Manhattan's gone and there's gonna be a nuclear war.
There's literally a scene where all the United States generals are sitting around talking about how, yeah, sure, like half the country's gonna get nuked. Doesn't seem that bad in terms of what it can be.
Yeah, it'll destroy New England. They didn't vote for me. And it'll spread to Mexico. That's fine. I'm not Mexican president. Also, the thing about Watchmen is it came out during the Cold War, like the book, but the movie came out after the Cold War, which makes it kind of feel dated. Like, oh, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is going to trigger a nuclear war. As opposed to what happened in real life, where it caused the collapse of the Soviet Union and end of the Cold War. Yeah. And I mean, maybe things would be different in this alternate history where the guy whose main military strategy was just bomb the shit out of places so people would be scared of the US. Maybe he would have escalated things like he does in the movie. But the point is, it feels kind of dated, and it makes the ending like, I had to do what I did to stop the Cold War because it was going to destroy us, feel kind of ridiculous because, dude, it would have just petered out eventually if you just sat tight, man.
Yeah, the story is very much so a product of the 80s, and it's weird seeing a film adaptation about it decades later, and it's like, we know how it ended, and it's completely different.
So far, we've talked a lot about what's in this movie, and I'd like to talk about what isn't in it, and is kind of the big problem, and supposedly why Alan Moore hates it so much. It cut out all the subplots. Like, there's 5 different subplots about just showing ordinary people reacting to these things. Like, there's this man at the newsstand, there's Rorschach's psychologist who has this great arc where just talking to Rorschach makes him into a person like Rorschach and kills his faith in humanity. And pretty much all of that ends up being cut. And that, added with the fact that this is a Zack Snyder film and he keeps putting blue paint on the lenses before he shoots every scene because he thinks that's cool. Like that instead of the bright Silver Age colors, which work because it's deconstructing the Silver Age and it looks like the Silver Age. Overall, the way this film is shot and the fact that it cuts out a lot of the heart and a lot of the deep character stuff with those side characters makes the film feel hollow. It's lacking a lot of the charm of the original book. It still has a lot of the great writing, but it's missing something.
Right. See, that's also one of the things that is one of my big points for one of my things with this movie is, yeah, Watchmen has sex, violence, and it has some very dark scenes and dark themes, but it's still like a Silver Age comic book. Like, it has the silly, wackier, lighthearted-esque superhero stuff.
It has a giant fucking squid destroying New York City.
Yeah, from an alternate dimension. The best way I can describe it is the graphic novel still has a lot of comic booky feel to it and tone to it, but they completely cut that out to have like an edgier film. And in some ways, I think in many ways they succeeded in doing that, but in terms of representing the graphic novel, I don't know.
And speaking of making it cooler, I feel like Zack Snyder didn't get what parts were supposed to not be cool. Like Night Owl, he looks great in this movie. In the comic, he looks like a dork. He's frumpy, has this ugly costume, but it's made cool in the movie. And that kind of defeats the point. And I am almost certain that Zack Snyder thinks Rorschach is cool, like as opposed to being this terrible hero that should not be idolized, this deeply broken person who may have some admirable traits, his determinism and his unwillingness to bow down in the face of evil, but is also a terrible person. I think this film portrays Rorschach as kind of being this cool action hero. Like I believe it's during the comedian's funeral, Rorschach tells a joke, like the famous Pagliacci, "But I am Pagliacci" joke. And in the comic, it's just him mumbling to himself as he's going about his business. And it's supposed to be, wow, the way he is saying this is not funny because he's a weirdo. But they turn it into this dark, edgy monologue.
Yeah, I also feel like there's just so much action and blood and violence added to this film that wasn't in the story. Like, I think the biggest example of that is the scene where the people are trying to get through Rorschach's cell so they can get revenge on him. In the graphic novel, the one guy, Rorschach, traps the guy's arms inside the cell, and so they just, alright, fine. So they slit the guy's throat, and alright, let's still try to continue on into your cell. In the movie, they fucking chainsaw the dude's arms off. Now, that was a badass scene, don't get me wrong, and I don't know, I myself, I'm not cringed by violence, and I thought that was a pretty cool scene, but I'm like, didn't necessarily have to happen. I feel like that's just violence for the sake of being violent.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they also, it's been a few years since I've read Watchmen, so grain of salt, I'm pretty sure they added in Laurie and Dan fighting their way through the prison to get to Rorschach.
In the graphic novel, it was one panel.
Yeah.
Not even a page, like a single panel.
Yeah. So anyway, let's get to the ending. Dan and Laurie, having regained their heroism, decide to break Rorschach out of jail. And when they go to break Rorschach out of jail, he's already broken out on his own. Because he's Rorschach, and he's very good at killing people. I have mixed feelings on Rorschach, but he is cool.
Yeah.
He is just his deadpan making quips as he kills people. It is amusing. By the way, Laurie goes to Mars to talk to John and try and convince him to save the world, while Dan and Rorschach discover that Ozymandias, Adrian, is behind everything and go to Antarctica to confront him. On Mars, John learns that Laurie's father was actually the comedian, that her mother went back to him after he tried to rape her, because Sally Jupiter is a very complex, complicated character that they don't really give time to breathe in the movie. But that causes John to realize, wait a minute, every single life only exists because of trillions of coincidences and small chances. That's a miracle. I like life now. Let's go off to save the world. Meanwhile, Dan and Rorschach confront Adrian in Antarctica, and he reveals his evil plan. He's going to blow up all the big cities and frame it on Dr. Manhattan so that the world will unite against Dr. Manhattan and it will stop the Cold War. And then it's the most famous scene from the comic. It is replicated in this movie. It's such a good moment. Dan's like, we aren't going to let you destroy those cities. And Adrian's like, let me? Dan, I'm not a comic book supervillain. In the comic, he says Republic Serial because it would be weird if he said he was a comic book supervillain, whatever.
Yeah.
Dan, I'm not a comic book supervillain. Do you really think I would explain my plan to you if you could stop it? I did this 35 minutes ago. Everyone's already dead, bucko. Oops, bit slow. Probably shouldn't have wasted half an hour letting Rorschach stop off and drop off his diary. Or really done anything. Flown faster. Should have made a faster ship. I don't know. Point is, you fucked up, Dan. Everyone's dead.
They have a big action scene. Dr. Manhattan shows up. Adrian is able to convince him that, this is for the better. Teaming up against him, Dr. Manhattan, will end the Cold War, prevent nuclear holocaust, and which that's the second time I've said Holocaust in a completely different context in this episode, which is weird. Yeah. But
also, it's worth noting, this is kind of a change, Adrian destroying the cities. That's in the book.
Yeah.
But in the comic, it is him creating a giant alien so that everyone unites against the new threat.
Yeah.
In this, it's him having it look like Dr. Manhattan did it as punishment for almost going to war. And I don't know if that's effective. Uniting to fight an alien versus uniting to fight the United States' nuclear arsenal that they weren't good at controlling.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the Soviets might have just continued to be at war with the US because the US accidentally destroyed Moscow because they couldn't control their attack dog. Oops.
Yeah, exactly. I do think Ozymandias was such wasted potential in this movie. Like, obviously, like, throughout the entire movie, it's like, okay, well, he's obviously going to be the villain in the end of the day.
We don't get any of his backstory and characterization, and he's just in there for the assassination scene and then at the ending.
Yeah. He's basically just there to be the twist ending. The twist villain in the end. And even when he's on screen, there's really not much character. He's just kind of this rich asshole. And then he is like, oh yeah, I'm the evil one behind all this. And that completely misrepresents who he is from the novel. And I know I keep comparing it to the novel, which you're not supposed to do because you're supposed to keep it as an entity in and of itself. But screw it. In the graphic novel, Ozymandias tells them after he does this, he has a moment with them. He goes, I did not want to do this. I had to do this. I was in the position to do what is right, and this is what I believe is right. I am responsible for the deaths of millions of people in order to save billions going forward. And that is a pain that I openly and willingly suffer for the rest of my life. And that is such an incredible character to me. Like, that just seems like that's just such a great characterization for him. And in this movie, Dan just punches him a little bit and he just stands there emotionless.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's the end of his character. He succeeded in doing what he's doing. It just does not work.
I will say, Ozymandias doesn't really get much screen time, which is to his detriment. But in the screen time he has, Matthew Good is amazing.
Oh, yes, he is great. But the character as written and as presented in the film, not that great.
One of my biggest problem related to Ozymandias, and probably the change in this movie that angers me the most, I do not know why they made this change. It's the best part of the book, and they fucked it up.
What's that?
In the book, after Rorschach's death, which we'll get to in a minute, Adrian asks Dr. Manhattan, was I right in the end? Did the ends justify the means? And Dr. Manhattan, who is omniscient, says, nothing ever ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends. Which is just this powerful, just simple destruction of his whole character. This ends justify the means. There are no ends. There's just things that happen. You didn't end war forever. You just killed a bunch of people because you were afraid of war. It's such a great moment. And in the movie, they don't have that moment. But they do have, at the end, Dan and Laurie being like, so, how do you think things are going to end up? Well, John always said that nothing ever ends. Oh.
Yeah, that was wasted potential.
Although I will say, something that they did do very, very well is Rorschach's death.
Yeah.
Rorschach just cannot accept this. He's going to tell everyone. He's going to destroy the peace because he's a principled man. If nothing else, he has his principles. Really fucked up evil principles, but he has them. And he goes out and Dr. Manhattan stands in front of him and says, I can't let you do this. And then Rorschach's just like, do it. Come on, do it. Like Shia LaBeouf. And then Dr. Manhattan says, it's such a shame Steve Jobs died of ligma. Who the hell is Steve Jobs? Ligma balls, and he explodes.
Yeah.
There have been multiple fantastic meme videos made of that scene, which kind of ruined it, but it's a very good scene.
Yeah. Rorschach gives Dr. Manhattan an ultimatum saying, I am going to do this no matter what. I'm going to expose the truth to the world that this peace, it's peace, but it's built on lies, and that's fucked up. That's not okay to him. And he says, in order to stop me, you are going to have to kill me. So kill me. And Dr. Manhattan kills him. And what to me sold that scene was Patrick Wilson's acting. He sold that scream so fucking well.
Yeah, he watches his friend explode and he just screams, no!
Night Owl and Silk Spectre 2, they go out together. Dr. Manhattan goes to create new life on Mars. Rorschach's journal made it to the news station.
Yeah. That is another subplot that's basically cut out, is that Rorschach is a fan of this far-right tabloid, like National Esquire or the Sun quality. And before he dies, he leaves all of the information on it to them, and they're gonna publish it, and maybe the truth's gonna come out. Except for, now that I think about it, no it wouldn't. Like, if the fucking Sun said, actually, Adrian Veidt was behind this nukes, I wouldn't believe them. These, like, fringe conspiracy theory far-right journals, like, I used to work in a grocery store. There was just right across from me, like, these bullshit headlines. I saw 30 different magazines at different points in time say Hillary Clinton finally arrested. Like, I'm pretty sure she's free. There was this one, like, tabloid magazine that was the best one because it, and just looking at the headlines, it seemed to have continuity between issues. It had an issue where it says that Queen Elizabeth II died. She's still alive as far as we know.
Yeah.
And then it had an issue after that saying Charles crowned King of England. And then after that has had an issue. William challenges Charles to a duel to the death, shouting, "You killed my mother and shall not be king." The point is, those are the type of people who he trusted the fate of the world to. And I don't think they're going to break that peace.
Yeah, I think that might have been the point Alan Moore was going for.
Yeah, it's left ambiguous whether or not it will actually work.
Right.
Also, they mentioned, hey, Ronald Reagan's running for president because things weren't bad enough.
It's also like the idea of if a newspaper or some blog posted like, oh, Bruce Wayne is Batman. How many people do you think would actually believe that?
I believe this is something, I've never actually read the comic where it happens, but I've heard other people say this is true in the comics, that Bruce Wayne goes on Reddit and posts conspiracy theories about Bruce Wayne being Batman to, like, make those people sound dumb.
So anyway, yeah, that was the 2009 Zack Snyder adaptation of the iconic, famous, successful Alan Moore comic book Watchmen.
And, I mean, it has its flaws. It is not as good as the book, and I didn't come out of this feeling like, wow, that was the greatest thing ever. This was amazing like I did with the book. But its closeness to the source material causes it to, admittedly, get a lot of the things the book did right. It is just a recreation of a really good book, but, I mean, it's a recreation of a really good book by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, and for the most part, it's a solid adaptation.
I think that overall, as speaking from someone, I know I've compared it to the graphic novel a lot in this episode, but as I've stated on multiple occasions, I have not read the graphic novel. I've just done some research on it, and I have a pretty good idea of what it's about. I've never actually physically read it. I've done everything but physically read it, you know? Speaking at it from someone who's just watching the movie, I think that having known going in that there is other stuff that was cut out and put on and left on the cutting room floor, this movie justifies its almost 3-hour runtime.
Mm-hmm.
Something like Batman v Superman does not.
No, this definitely deserved to be this long.
Even longer. I
don't have any problem with the length of this. It could have been a bit longer.
Yeah.
Should have been a miniseries. If this was made nowadays, it would be a miniseries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in many ways, after having really gone through a lot of Zack Snyder's filmography, particularly that of over the last 10 years, I do think that this is top tier of his work. And overall, I do think it's a good movie. It has a justified runtime. I think it looks good, looks interesting. There's some moments of CGI that don't hold up as well. I thought the CGI for Dr. Manhattan was fucking amazing.
He was all CG all the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good that I could not tell. I was going back and forth. Okay, is that like an actor that is being edited with blue effect on him, or is that a CG creation?
Yeah.
Billy Crudup was amazing as Dr. Manhattan, which we haven't mentioned.
And the CGI, well, also like the CGI Dr. Manhattan, his face looks exactly like the real guy, too. So there were moments, things that were changed, choices that were made that didn't make a whole lot of sense in the grand scheme of things, especially in relation to the book. Overall, I think this is a good movie, a decent adaptation of the source material that I have not read, in fairness. But so take that with a grain of salt, as you will. I don't know. Overall, I think this is a good movie.
I think it's pretty good.
It's not like spectacular, amazing as everyone thinks it is, but I do think it's good, and I found enjoyment, and I did get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
So
where are you gonna rate it?
I'm gonna give it a 7.5 out of 10. This is a solid movie. It's good. It has some flaws, it has some drawbacks. Overall, not one of my favorites, but overall, I had a good time watching it.
I'll give it an 8.5. Like I said, it's lacking a lot of the heart and charm of the book, and there are some changes that really annoy me, but it gets a lot of the depth and intelligence of the book across accidentally. Like, I don't think Zack Snyder understood the book, but he just recreated it, so he accidentally made something deep. And the acting is great, and overall, it's a solid adaptation that could have been better.
Yeah, I agree. But then again, that's most adaptations.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more see what I'm doing, my work, you can follow me on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitch, all at Riley James Thorpe, RileyJamesThorpe, and I post a lot of content on there. Casey, what about you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at JarmesCasey, JarmesCasey. Check out Hell of a Game, it's a D&D podcast I do. Also, check out Speedwave, assuming I actually release it. It's a game I've been working on that we're gonna have a beta release out soon. It's a racing game where you're a shark dude in a cyberpunk city. Just look it up or check my Twitter, I don't know. Anyway, as always, I'm Casey Jarms.
And I'm Riley Thorpe.
And hey, it's just a movie. Don't lose your head about it. Especially not to a ladder.